Play calling or execution? Let's break down the film of the Falcons' offensive issues in week one.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So today, your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, will be breaking down the all 22 of the Falcons week one game. We'll talk a lot about the rookies and the defense, some of the observations there. We'll talk about the play calling, Zac Robinson's game plan, some of the struggles that carried over from last year into week one when it came to the lack of explosiveness and Darnell Mooney's absence and the lack of play action. All of those things are on deck for you. But we've been doing, these all 22 reviews for several years now on Locked On Falcons podcasts, and we will continue doing so as, Lord willing and all that stuff. It's one of those things where I appreciate all the everydayers that we're back for more of these all 22 reviews that we do every Tuesday evening on YouTube, every Wednesday on your preferred audio feed, and all the everydayers that make this podcast their first listen each and every day. All you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So let's start off the conversation talking about getting back into the conversation coming out of week one, which is criticism about Zac Robinson's play calling. And the reason why we're harping on this is because, I want to make it clear as we go through the next several weeks here on the podcast, how and why I criticize Zac Robinson's play calling versus how other people do so, because this is going to be an ongoing conversation in the weeks and months coming up. And for me, I typically try to focus on systemic issues, if you understand that, right? Things that can affect multiple plays, many plays, most plays, all plays potentially, not just necessarily criticizing, I didn't like this one specific play call, right? Or these 5 specific play calls, right? Because as I've said before, in a game like the Falcons played on Sunday, where you have 71 offensive plays, they're not all going to be winners. There aren't very many things that any human being can do 71 times and be perfect on, right? If you're making a triple album, you're not going to have 71 tracks and have no skips, right? You're probably not going to make 71 free throws in a row. And then those are just examples where you don't necessarily have 11, large human beings actively working against you 71 times over the course of you trying to do whatever you're trying to do, like you do in a football game. And, one of the examples I've seen for people criticizing the play calling was the criticizing of that goal line run to Bijan Robinson on the penultimate drive, where Bijan ran outside, got stuffed for a 3-yard loss that came right after Penix's first 4th down scramble, before his last 4th down scramble that took the lead. It's certainly debatable whether or not that was an optimal play call, but I think you can have that debate on every single play. And again, they can't all be winners, but the Falcons on that specific play ran a variation of crack toss, where you get a down block from your outside receiver, in this case, Drake London, who is your best blocking wide receiver. And then you sort of pull 2 guys outside. And this time it was Charlie Warner and Matthew Bergeron. Oftentimes you'll have the tackle pull instead of the guard, or, the tackle and the guard, or the tackle and the tight end, or whatever. But to me, the idea behind this play call from Zac Robinson, the Falcons offensive coordinator, was you're potentially going to get 3 blockers taking out 3 defenders. And if Bijan can beat the one unblocked pursuit linebacker, in this case, Savasi Dennis, to the corner, it's going to be a score. And Bijan did beat Savasi Dennis. The problem is, Bijan did his job, but nobody else did theirs, right? Drake, Warner, and Bergeron all failed to hit their assignments. And so to me, I look at that failure of that play as not necessarily, oh, this is a bad play call, and it's more an execution issue. And to me, that gets to the heart of some of the issues, I think, with the Falcons, particularly when it comes to the run game. Their blocking was just bad. They just were not executing, particularly when it came to the run game. It's one of the reasons why, I know one of the criticisms of that specific play is why not run it up the middle? And they tried running it up the middle in short yardage 3 times already in that game. And 2 times it failed. And the 3rd time it barely worked, mostly. And someone blew their assignment because you had an unblocked defender in Logan Hall on that particular play. ready to meet Algier in the hole. And unfortunately, Algier is the juggernaut and basically is an immovable object. And once he gets some momentum, he was able to generate enough force that he was able to fall forward and convert in that short yardage situation. But it wasn't because the Falcons executed their ability to run up the middle or anything like that. So, when we talk about the shortcomings of Zac Robinson's play calling, like I think they do exist, right? And a lot of it is due with the attempted diversity of his play calling and what led to a predictable play calling. But I don't think that one play, as we outlined in terms of that goal line run to Bijan, was a predictable play, because as far as I know, that's a play that the Falcons never ran before. There was no real key or indication that the Falcons were going to run that play. I know a lot of people are like, hey, all the Falcons all defenses have to do is just follow Charlie Warner's block, but that's not a new development. That's been true since, week 1 of last year or week 2 of last year or whatever. And before, the Falcons were able to execute those issues. And like I was talking with someone in the Locked On Falcons Discord, hit the link in the description if you want to join the conversation. But we both basically concluded after watching the film that this was probably Charlie Warner's worst game as a blocker since he's joined Atlanta. And like, to me, it's not a coincidence that the Falcons really struggled to run the football, because Charlie Warner's, alongside Caleb McGarry and Drew Dalman and Chris Lindstrom are kind of the guys that are the engines, have been the engines for the Falcons run game over the last year. And that engine, with Dalman gone, with McGarry injured, and with Warner struggling, really stalled out on Sunday. So hopefully the Falcons will get more success running the football. We'll talk about some of the predictability issues that they're going to have to avoid that they showed, particularly on Sunday, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Now, since the NFL season is here, FanDuel wants to make sure that you're ready for kickoff with this can't miss offer right now. New customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app in a variety of ways that FanDuel is going to give you to win, right? If you're feeling particularly good about Bijan Robinson or particularly bad about Bijan Robinson in this week 2 matchup against the Vikings, you can go and look at his over-unders on various player props. And if you're feeling some type of way about multiple things going into this week 2 game or any real game, that's where the same game parlay, where you can bet a little, win a lot, comes into action. Just get a little bit of that action to make things interesting over at FanDuel. So when you're ready to play, head on over to FanDuel.com, download the FanDuel app, and you'll get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet in order to win $300 in bonus bets. Again, FanDuel.com. And today's episode is also brought to you by Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see the parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times are going to keep you from punting on projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side protected. Supply House will save you time on your next project. If you need the parts fast, they have the next day delivery, and their part finder tools and 3D schematics can save you hours on jobs. With every detail matters. And it's not just time you save, it's money too. The free Trademaster program, if you join, you can score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. So visit supplyhouse.com and sign up for free and use promo code SHNFL5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com, promo code SHNFL5 for 5% off your order. Supplyhouse.com, real people, real service. So one of the knocks on Zac Robinson's handling of the run game in this week 1 game was his predictability. But again, I don't think that applied to the previous example that we talked about. And it was, the predictability was based off of who was in the game between Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, kind of determined what type of runs the Falcons were going to run. Tori McElhaney of AtlantaFalcons.com mentioned this on the Falcon Squad show on Monday. I was able to confirm that via film. Got to go out here and mansplain. I'm kidding. Basically when Algier was in the game, the Falcons mostly ran their outside zone staple concepts. And when Bijan was in the game was when they were running inside zone duo and some of those mixers that we've been talking about all offseason that they were going to run in addition to the outside zone stuff. That, looking at their 2 sort of staple outside zone plays, stretch and crack toss, They ran stretch 4 times. 3 of those were with Algier. They had a 75% success rate on that. They ran crack toss that one time that we outlined earlier, which was Bijan, and they did not succeed on that particular play. They ran, mid zone and split zone, which we're going to just group into outside zone / wide zone, which it technically isn't, but it's close enough that, I'm trying to make a point. They ran mid zone 3 times. 2 of those were with Algier. Success rate was 67% on those 3 runs. Split zone 3 times. 2 of those with Algier. Success rate was 33%. So if you combine all those runs into outside zone staple concepts that the Falcons ran regularly last year, they ran outside zone about 11 times, a success rate of 55%, so about 6 of 11 successes. What's notable is that crack toss and those 2 split zone runs, 2 of those split zone runs came inside the 5, right? In which I don't think is the ideal place to be running those types of runs. But if I think back without double checking my notes, I would imagine the Falcons had some success running outside zone near the goal line last year. And so it's not crazy for them to think, oh, well, maybe that will carry over into 2025. It didn't in week 1. But if you go beyond those 11 outside zone runs, there were 11 other runs to Bijan or Tyler Algier, and their success rate on those plays was only 27%. Right. And again, for those of you not familiar with success rate, anything below 40% success is bad. Anything above 50 is very good. Ideal, average to a good is 45% or above. So they were very good running the outside zone, and they were very bad running anything else. And to me, the question is going to be similar to what we saw last year with last year's Bruno game, that week 1 game against Pittsburgh, the game that we don't talk about a lot. But one of the things that came out of that game was the Falcons went into that game wanting to run a lot of 2 tight end sets, and it didn't work. And they came out of that game basically scrapping the 2 tight end set for like the next 12 weeks. They didn't really run it in earnest until the Minnesota game in week 14, after that week 1 game loss to the Steelers. And part of me wonders, like we talked all offseason about the Falcons diversifying their run game and adding more mixers and all this stuff, and it didn't work in week 1. And are they just going to do what they did last year and just basically scrap it? So that will be something to keep an eye on. When it comes to Zac Robinson's predictability, when it comes to the passing game, going back to the earlier point where I made, where I feel like there are certain things that I tend to be more critical of that are more systemic issues than necessarily individual play calls when it comes to criticizing his play calling. 2 of those issues I think showed up on Sunday that I talked about on this podcast, as well as, spend a lot of time with the Locked On Falcons insiders, as well as the Discord, talking about last year. And I think these are 2 issues that got overshadowed late last season because so much of the discourse was, Kirk Cousins related, and he was kind of taking up all the oxygen in the room. And the first issue was Darnell Mooney's injury last year, that he got injured against Denver. Now, he only missed 1 game after that point against Carolina in week 18, but he was on the injury report for like the next 3 or 4 games with various injuries. Outside of that Minnesota game where Mooney was, really cooking in that game, and then the Carolina game where Mooney was out and Drake London was cooking, the Falcons, after that Denver, starting in that Denver game and continuing for the rest of the season, really struggled to generate explosive plays. And you saw that kind of manifest against Tampa Bay, where the Falcons struggled without Darnell Mooney in the line to generate explosive plays. And it goes to one of the criticisms I've had from Zac Robinson at the beginning, where, and I've seen other people make this comparison recently, is sort of comparing him to Dirk Cutter. Going back to 2019, 2020 Dirk Cutter, where when you looked at the explosiveness of that version of the Falcons, a lot of it was just kind of, hey, Julio, Ridley, go get open, be good, do something, right? And to me, last year, a lot of the Falcons' explosiveness was, primarily Mooney, go do something. And then in that week 18 game, it was primarily Drake London, go do something. And you saw that on Sunday, with Mooney out of the lineup and Drake London not really generating those explosive plays that he did in that week 18 game. Basically all the explosive plays, all 3 of them were basically guys go do something incredible. Bijan had 2 of them, the 50-yard touchdown, which was a simple check down that he turned into a 50-yard touchdown. You had another one where he got behind the defense on the sideline. And then the third one was Ray McLeod in the final drive in the 4th quarter, which was designed to be a 14-yard out route to get out of bounds and stop the clock and keep the chains moving. And then the defender missed the tackle. Ray was able to tiptoe down the sideline and add another 10 yards and turn that into a, decent, solid gain into an explosive play for 24 yards. And then the second thing that, my issue with Zac Robinson is the play action passing. that essentially the Falcons don't really do a great job attacking the middle of the field. And to me, the basic idea behind play action is you fake the run in order to suck up the linebackers, and then you attack the void behind them. And that's why play action is so potent, because you're really attacking the most vulnerable area of a defense that you have a lot of space to run into. And to me, it's not to say the Falcons never attack the middle of the field when they run play action stuff, but they don't do it on a regular. It's clear to me if you were to sit down and watch all their play action passes, it would be a clear priority that it's clear that their priority is not to attack the middle of the field. And it's one of the reasons why I defended Kirk late last season, despite his struggles, which was like the thing that Kirk excelled the most in at Minnesota was basically attacking the middle of the field via play action, and the Falcons to basically bring Kirk into their offense and not do really any of that. To me, and a lot of people were like, oh, that's a Kirk issue. Kirk is cooked. That's why they're not doing that. And it's like, to me, that's a Zac Robinson issue. And, I'm far too humble of a podcaster to sit here and go, I told you so at this stage based off of week one. But, it does go back to a conversation we had with Trayshawn Diaz of the Falcoholic back in June, where Zac Robinson got a pass for a lot of folks in year one. And he basically said then, we're not going to be giving him that pass in year two. And to me, that's you're seeing that pass get it revoked with a lot of the discourse around Zac Robinson and his play calling and criticism surrounding it over the last 48 to 72 hours, depending on when you're listening to this. And so we'll see, again, we've never given Zac Robinson a pass in large part because, some of the things we're talking about with the Dirk Cutterness and the Arthur Smithness and the Steve Sarkisian, these were all things that I observed watching their offenses. And I'm like, this is the same thing with Zac Robinson. And, I think a lot of the narrative surrounding the Falcons going into this offseason was the only problem, because, basically they said it without saying it. They only made one change on offense, and it was really the quarterback position. They were basically we just upgraded our quarterback and we made a lateral move at center, and that's all we needed to do. And a lot of the narrative was basically hey, the only problem with our offense was the quarterback, and you'll see. And that raised expectations, and that's one of the reasons why over the last couple of weeks, we've been saying hey, the expectation is that for them to score 35 points out the gates, because that's kind of the bed that they've made. And, it wasn't because I really expected them to do that. I was certainly skeptical of it all. Right. But, the team was basically saying hey, this offense, implicitly saying it without explicitly saying it, that this offense is just going to click now that Mike's in it and Kirk is not. And we didn't see that really click. And Mike played well in week one, but you didn't really see the offense click like that. And it was certainly, to me, why we were so skeptical of some of these things. And, then they added fuel to that fire, but basically saying we don't need to play guys in the preseason because we don't get off the slow starts. And, we're not really talking about that here on this podcast because we're kind of waiting and seeing, because basically my stance is you got to see how a team performs over the first 4 weeks to know if they could have benefited from the preseason as opposed to just one game. So, we'll maybe have that conversation at the bye week if the Falcons don't get out of their offensive funk by then. And then we'll be but, we'll see how these next couple of weeks go for the Falcons. It's basically when it comes to Zac Robinson. And so we'll see, if he lives up to the hype or not. Again, a lot of it is just this regime talking a lot of talk and then not really walking the walk. But there's 16 more opportunities for them to do that, and we'll see if they can wind up doing that. We'll continue today's Locked On Falcons All 22 review, talking about what I saw on the defense, and as well as talking about how each rookie looked defensively. As well as the new kicker in Atlanta and what that means for Younghoe Koo status as we continue and wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details, and Mazda is bringing that same intention to how we craft every model. You can feel the Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to the available Nappa leather upholstery. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with the confidence through almost any season, even football season. So like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. So the Falcons signed a new kicker to their practice squad on Tuesday. We talked about how Raheem Morris indicated on Monday that they were planning on bringing veteran kickers in to try out. And the player that they wound up selecting was John Parker Romo. He did play 4 games with the Vikings last year, going 11 for 12 or 11 for 13 in those 4 games. He also has some experience kicking for San Antonio in the XFL in 2023, where he went 17 of 19. They worked out 6 kickers. No Rodrigo Blankenship for all my UGA fans out there. They did work out Michael Badgley and Zane Gonzalez. Those are 2 of the veteran guys that played 60-ish games in the NFL over 6 years. Generally, I think both are like in the 80 percentile, low 80s in terms of field goal accuracy over their careers. And then they had 3 other undrafted free agents. Ben Sauls, Pitt legend, was a 2025 UDFA. I think it was at the Shrine Bowl and was with the Steelers this summer. Maddox Trujillo was an undrafted free agent with the Colts this summer. And Ryan Hiker was another undrafted free agent that I don't believe was in any camp this summer. And so John Parker Romo emerges of that. We'll see. They also brought in a punter likely to hold on some of those field goals. They pair long snappers to snap on those field goals that they were trying out these kickers. They also worked out a wide receiver in Jaquan Jackson of Tulane. If you watched any Michael Pratt a couple of years ago when he was coming out at the Tulane quarterback, you probably saw some Jaquan Jackson that you liked. They worked out 3 safeties as well, including Maxon Hook, who I saw at the Senior Bowl. And someone asked me, a Locked On Falcons insider asked me, like, does this mean something about DeMarco Hellams? We'll see. It could mean something with DeMarco Hellams. To me, the fact that they weren't carrying a 5th safety on the practice squad was already a surprise so far. So that could just be, it just could be simple. It's like, let's just get another body at safety rather than having Ronnie Harrison there. Let's get a real safety there just in case, rather than necessarily being an indication of, Hellams is, having extended absence. But, talking about Romo, the kicker, essentially what he is a immediate plan B insurance policy that, we know Koo's leash is going to be much shorter. And so, a week from today, we might be talking about John Parker Romo taking over as the Falcons kicker if Koo doesn't get his act together. Lenny Krieg, the German sensation, right now appears to be the plan C. Now, the question is going to be, I don't expect the Falcons to carry 3 kickers all season long, 2 on the practice squad and 1 on the roster. I think we'll probably, my guess is, again, we'll see how it goes. But I think them carrying 2 kickers and, not counting Lenny Krieg, who is as an international player, doesn't really count towards their practice squad or whatever. But with John Parker Romo and Koo, them carrying two, I think it's temporary just because, like, probably by the bye week, one of these guys will be gone, right? Either because Koo gets his act together and the Falcons are like, okay, we're good with Koo now. Or Koo continues to struggle and he gets replaced by John Parker Romo. So, we'll see how that resolves itself. To clear a practice squad spot, the Falcons did cut Ronnie Perkins, the edge rusher. Now, we'll see how the kicker situation goes. Let's move on to the defense. One of the things that stood out in this game was how much pressure the Falcons were able to generate in this game. Based off my charting of the Falcons defense, I know there were other, sites that had the Falcons getting pressure on 40% of Baker Mayfield's dropbacks. I had them getting pressure on 57%. But Baker delivered when he got pressure on. You may have seen the metric where Michael Penix was 3rd in the NFL in EPA per dropback when he was pressured in week 1. Well, number 1 on that list was Baker Mayfield, and basically his expected points added per dropback was almost triple what Michael Penix's was when he was pressured. Now, I don't know if EPA is always the most reliable metric to measure, effectiveness and efficiency, because it's geared towards explosiveness, and particularly if you get an explosive play touchdown, like the Bucs were able to get a couple of times, as well as the Falcons on that 50-yard touchdown from Bijan, that's going to really boost your EPA numbers in a major way. The way when I'm charting defense, I chart it via success rate. And basically the Bucs had a 43% success rate on the 21 plays that I charted the Falcons generating pressure, 21 dropbacks. And that success rate actually fell to 38% on the 16 plays where I didn't have them getting pressure. And you saw a similar success rate split when the Falcons blitzed, right? When they blitzed, the Bucs generated a success rate of 36% and a success rate of 43% on non-blitzes. Baker's scrambles were a problem. He had 3 successful third down conversions on scrambles, 2 of which came on drives that led to points. I know Tanisha Batiste talked about this on the postcast as well as the Falcon Squad show, where it's like, oh, well, we don't have to worry about a mobile quarterback again until Jaden Daniels, or it's not really a pressing concern. And I'm like, we might be underestimating J.J. McCarthy and Bryce Young. We saw J.J. McCarthy had a 14-yard scramble touchdown on Monday Night Football against the Bears. And Bryce Young scored 2 touchdowns on scrambles in Week 18 against the Falcons last year. So it's not as if Bryce can't move if he needs to be able to move. So I agree with T where it shouldn't be a problem, but it shouldn't have been a problem Week 1 given all the athleticism and speed that the Falcons added up front this year, and it still was a problem. So Falcons going to Falcon. So, another thing that stood out to me was coverages. The Falcons primarily played 4 coverages: cover 1, cover 6, cover 4, and cover 3, being close behind those cover 1 and cover 6, which is what they maintained. What stood out to me was that they played very little disguise in this game, which is, is somewhat expected given, Jeff Ulbricht's desire to simplify things. But to me, I think it was a contributing factor to why I think the Bucs seemed a little bit better at carving up their zone coverage in the second half, because they were able to kind of recognize what the Falcons were doing and made it a little bit predictable. And so the Bucs struggled to generate successful plays in the first half against cover 4 and cover 6. They had less struggles in the second half. They had more struggles in the second half playing when the Falcons played man coverage in cover 1. So we'll see, how that sort of holds up. But that to me was interesting as the season wears on. On the fronts, the Falcons stuck with their mainly 3-4 under front in their base defense, and then a 4-2 over front in their nickel, although they did have 1-5-1 penny front in nickel. They did play big nickel 1 snap. I think it was the opening snap with Jordan Fuller as that third safety, or third, safety instead of Billy Bowman. There were some concerns watching the film of the run defense when it came to their nickel fronts. The Bucs ran it 5 times against the Falcons base front and had a rushing success rate of 0%. Obviously very, very good for the Falcons defense, very bad for the Bucs offense. And then the 13 times the Bucs ran the ball against the Falcons nickel defense, they had a 54% success rate. And again, that's not counting scrambles. And we've talked before about, concerns about the run defense, and this may be a concern moving forward, where opposing teams are just going to be like, okay, well, we're going to force the Falcons into a nickel front with 3 wide receivers, and we're just going to run it down their throat. And a lot of that has to do with the Falcons having a child-sized nickel corner, and also being pretty light in terms of mass on the interior. And speaking of being light on the interior, the Falcons decided in their infinite wisdom that they were going to play David Onyemata and LaCale London. In addition to LaCale London at nose tackle in their 3-4 base, David Onyemata got the bulk of those snaps, and it did not go particularly well. And, I've seen over the years with Falcon fans, particularly on Twitter, like, oh, David Onyemata should play nose. And this game to me is basically exhibit A of why I've always pushed back against that. And to me, this causes a lot of question marks for me with the coaching staff, but we're not going to go on that rant. I'll probably say that for the extended all 22. Sorry, insiders, you're going to get that rant from me about David Onyemata and why this is, I'm not going to say a massive red flag, but it is a red flag about this coaching staff's ability to put players in a position to succeed. But we'll see how it turns out over the course of the season, as well as, a continued indication of their complacency, where it's like they just ignored a problem for the entire offseason and thought for some idiotic reason that a player that has never been a nose tackle could just solve that problem. But again, we're not going to go on that rant today. Let's finish talking about the rookies. James Pearce had 3 pressures based off my charting. Jalon Walker had 2. For me, all 3 of Pearce's came in the closing minutes of each half. That he had 1 on at the final play in the first half on that Bowman sack, and then he had 2 on the final drive in the last 90 seconds of the game. And then I think both of his pressures came in the second quarter. But I honestly came away a little bit more impressed with Jalon Walker in this game than I did James Pearce. Now, part of that may be just because my expectations were much lower with Jalon Walker going into week 1. Like I already, based off of what we saw in the preseason, I was higher on James Pearce going into week 1 than I was Jalon Walker, because basically we barely saw Jalon Walker, and outside of, a couple of solid run fits, didn't really do much as a pass rusher. But I came away pleasantly surprised with Jalon Walker. And I won't say I was disappointed with James Pearce, but it was just kind of like, okay, like he didn't really move the needle in a major way for me watching the game in a positive way. So, he wasn't poor, bad, or anything like that. He's just kind of okay. He's out there, he's doing stuff. Billy Bowman had the sack. That was the highlight. I still think there are issues on film with Billy Bowman when it comes to coverage and run support, but we're trying to be positive to wrap up today's episode. So I will bide my time on my Billy Bowman takes at the perfect opportunity to strike. Right, like Thanos, I am inevitable when it comes to that. I will just be in the shadows, lurking, waiting for Billy Bowman to slip up, and then I will be like, But I'm trying to start. Jarvis may be listening to this right now. I'm trying to start another beef with Jarvis. We can, we had the Troy Anderson versus Nate Landman thing. We need another one. Jarvis has been pro Billy Bowman. I've been pro Xavier Watts. That doesn't mean that we're anti the other guy, but we got to play it up a little bit. So I'm going to have to become anti Billy Bowman just for the sake of that ongoing war. And I feel like I'm in the lead because Xavier Watts was outstanding. He was by far the best of these rookies. And it's funny because after the draft, I was like, he's the safest pick of this Falcons draft class, where it's like he's the guy that is the safest bet to be good. Right, where his floor is high enough where it's like he's going to be good. It's a question of like where is his ceiling, right? And then I was a little worried about that based off of he kind of had a down summer, and it was just like, oh, maybe I was wrong on Xavier Watts, and it was like, you know me, like got to be right on these things. And then he goes out there and balls out in week 1. I'm like, oh yes, this is why I'm so good at what I do. So it's like, okay, vindication. All right. I'm glad. And even if he goes out there and struggles the next 4 weeks, I'm like, oh well, we always had the week 1 game, and that's all that matters. We got to push agendas. So those are my thoughts on the rookies. In terms of like other individual players, I thought Ebiketie was good. I thought Harrison was good. I thought London did some nice things. Rook had some positive moments. Leonard Floyd, Anyamata, Brandon Dolis to me were pretty meh. Diablo was really good. Ellis was up and down. Like there were good moments, there were bad moments. To me, a lot of the bad moments were, his usage. AJ Terrell balled out. It was one of the best games he's had against Tampa Bay ever. Mike Hughes had his issues, but I didn't go into this game. I'm like, this is not the game for Mike Hughes to ball out. He had a couple of positive plays. Don't get me wrong, but it was just like, all your concerns about Mike Hughes I almost say got exposed, but kind of got exposed in this game. Jesse Bates was cheating. We got burned with his cheating in this game. I ain't mad at it because it's definitely helped the Falcons defense more over the last 2+ years than it's hurt us. But we've now had 2 out of our last 3 games that we've seen Jesse Bates play in, where the cheating has, his lack of belief in monogamy has burned the Falcons, right? You know what I'm saying? Like it's really burned us. Like we got to go to a clinic, right, to get rid of the burn. If you follow what I'm saying, okay. So hopefully Jesse, let's get some penicillin and clean this thing up. So that's it, guys, for my all 22 review. If you want to see the film of some of the things that I'm talking about, including taking a deeper look at Michael Penix, so we're probably going to get like 20+ plays, talk about his ability to handle the pressure, the red zone stuff. We'll get into the run game. We'll look at some of the defensive standouts. So that is available for you as an extended all 22 review. That's only available exclusively to the Locked On Falcons insiders, which should be available to them sometime Wednesday afternoon, evening. And if you want to become a Locked On Falcons insider, get access to that for free, 14-day free trial. You can get that as well as week 2's, extended all 22 review for the Vikings over the next 2 weeks in that 14-day free trial. You can do so. And you can do that at the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. 14-day free trial, $4.99 a month thereafter. Great resource. Not only do you get extended all 22 review, you got my thoughts on John Parker Romo. John Parker Wilson. Yeah, that's a nostalgia. That's a oldie but goodie. John Parker Romo signing like 4 hours ago, or depending on when you're listening, even longer. As well as you get live thoughts on during the game, as well as priority on future Q&A. So great reasons to all become Locked On Falcons Insider at the link in the description below. So to go check that out. But that's going to do it for us here on this extended, or this not extended all 20, this regular all 22 review. Go check out the extended by being an insider. And continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Tomorrow we should be back with a crossover Thursday with Locked On Vikings Luke Braun to break down this week 2 action between the Falcons and Vikings. JJ McCarthy versus Michael Penix. It's going to be epic. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL to get 2 shows daily. 1 shot of espresso from Tyler Rowland, a shot from the barbershop. Oh, okay, that didn't work. With Tony Wiggins. Locked On NFL is all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.